Hi, I'm back again with another section from my book, Finding Yoyu. And if you've been following along, then you know that in the last section, we had just learned that my mother-in-law needed surgery, and so I opted to stay in Hiroshima to be there as a support person, and thought at first that I was going to be there to be supporting her, and later learned that it was more about being there to stay with Otosan, my father-in-law. So let me jump right in, and it actually, don't be surprised, it starts with my surgery, not Okasan's surgery. Here we go. When I had my hip replaced in 2012, I stayed in the hospital for 3 weeks. Every morning after breakfast, I was escorted to the training room for rehabilitation and massage. For 3 weeks, all I had to think about was eating, sleeping, bathing, and building new muscles. I loved it. I hear that in the US, you're lucky if you can afford to stay 3 days. The healthcare system in Japan allows for a generous length of stay without making you broke. They usually like to keep you in the hospital until you are ready to manage on your own once released, and they mean it. Okasan's surgery was a success, but she had not been walking much for several months before and needed help getting her strength back, her strength and balance back. They planned to keep her in the big hospital for several weeks, and then she would be transferred to the local hospital for another month. It was a long drive to either hospital, so we didn't visit Okasan every day. I knew that Okasan would be okay, and that the real reason I was staying was to be with Otosan. One of the days we stayed home and didn't go to visit Okasan was my 43rd birthday. That morning I told Otosan, and all he said was, "Oh, really?" Birthdays were not something a lot of Japanese people from his generation celebrated. Akira had already texted me a birthday wish, so I knew I would have to, or get to, celebrate the rest of the day on my own. After breakfast, Otosan went outside to work somewhere on the property, probably in his vegetable patch down by the river. I was supposed to be on my computer doing some correspondence. I planned to walk around the far side of the rice field to check in with the river instead. A much better way to spend my birthday morning, I thought. From the front porch, I could see the rice field in front of me and the bamboo trees merging into the cedar-forested hill rising up beyond it. I knew the river ran between the rice field and the hill, but couldn't see the water until I got to the other side of the rice field. As I stood on the bank listening to the water, it was easy to forget where I was. The rushing water reminded me of all the rivers I explored as a kid growing up in Washington. A wave of vertigo washed over me. I felt my heart swell. I felt the little girl, the woman, the land over there, and the land over here, all connected by Earth Mother's water. This river and I had history. On my first visit, over 15 years ago, Akira and I got in the river with Otosan and hefted big boulders around to help shore up the riverbank. There had been a lot of heavy rainfall the week before, and Otosan was afraid the next big rain would cause the river to overflow into the rice field. My comparatively big body can be cumbersome in Japan, but it came in handy that day in the river. When Otosan tells the story, he always remarks how that was the day he realized that having such a big, tall girl around might be useful. I remember feeling exactly that way, too. Useful. It was a great feeling, and for me marked the beginning of our special relationship. Otosan knew he could count on me, and I knew he trusted me to get the job done. I figured that was why these days he had no problem leaving everything about Okasan up to me. He would go with me to the hospital if I asked, but I could tell that he would rather be working in his garden or tinkering with the tractor in the garage. Looking at the river, I could see that the big boulders we moved years ago were still in place. It took me a second to find them because everything looked different. A few years back, the family property, including the rice paddies, had been leveled and reshaped when the county paved a new road up to the prefectural park a few miles past the house. The old Japanese farmhouse was gone in place of a new modern house, but remarkably, the river had stayed the same. The water was clear, and I could see a few small fish swimming in the deeper pools. I continued my walk, moving away from the river and onto the packed dirt path bordering the rice field. Looking down, I found a treasure on the path. Footprints, or more likely, hoof prints. I started to follow them and remembered the old saying, "One who walks in another's tracks leaves no footprints." I couldn't agree this time. I was following the same path in the same direction, but my footprints would wipe out these tracks with a single step. They were small and sunk deep into the soil. Wild boar tracks. The tracks were exciting for me and mundane for Otosan. He struggled to keep the wild boars out of his vegetables, just like some people struggle to keep out the deer or rabbits. The wild boars had clearly crossed where the river was shallow, walked around the rice field, and headed for the vegetable patch. They must have found something else of interest, because I didn't see any new damage in Otosan's garden. They often left enormous holes rooting around for the treats Otosan had planted. The first time I saw the damage they can do to a garden, it was so big that I missed it because I was looking for something smaller. What I thought was a large section of the garden being prepared for planting was actually the work of the boars. I knew I should feel disgruntled that they walked the property so boldly and ate Otosan's sweet potatoes, but today I couldn't. I secretly felt a little proud of these wild beings and took a picture of their tracks. I was born in the year of the boar, after all. At lunchtime, I showed the picture of the tracks to Otosan. He wasn't impressed. Though the boars were headed for the vegetables this morning, they often headed straight for the rice fields and wreaked havoc. Evidently, they like to roll around and cover themselves with the mud. The mud protects them from the insects like buto, the biting gnats, also known as buyo. Like many of the other farmers, Otosan wanted to set up an electric fence around the rice field to keep the boars out. The crows liked to get into the rice paddies too. I could hear them squawking every morning at each other. Otosan had an elaborate homemade system set up so that if you pulled on a wire at one end of the rice field, it would activate a lever that, when released, banged on a piece of metal on the other side of the rice field. It made a huge racket and scared the crows away for a few minutes. When that failed, Otosan shot several rounds from his cap gun. Personally, I thought the humans were noisier than the crows. Okay, that's where I'll leave it for today. In the section I have for you next week, we're going to be taking a drive. So I hope you'll be back, and I hope you're enjoying the story. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.